I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. Don't miss Cold's new Season 3, where I look into the unsolved disappearance of Cherie Warren, a woman last seen leaving her job at a Salt Lake City office in 1985. Police cast suspicion on Cherie's estranged husband and boyfriend, but never made any arrests or recovered Cherie's remains. Find Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, anywhere you get your podcasts.
And welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. But more importantly, it's a podcast about recovery. Casey Scott, your host, and my road to recovery began with Pinnacle Recovery. They're the ones that really helped me out and got me started down this road and kind of led me into this forum of podcasting. Of course, I've got my sidekick. Can I call you a sidekick?
Sure thing. I'd love to be your sidekick.
Or co-host?
I like sidekicks.
Sidekick, Dr. Matt Woolley.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man.
Clinical psychologist.
That's true, yeah.
And what does that mean?
That means we work on clinical problems that you usually think of that take you to a shrink. You know, depression, anxiety, addictions,
and a lot of
like that.
Depression, anxiety are a lot of reasons why people use.
Oh, absolutely. No, in fact, I'm convinced that emotional problems, including things like depression and anxiety, are some of the main reasons people continue to use even when they realize they have a problem, because they use to get that immediate relief from those other issues. Sometimes it starts as fun, but it usually progresses into something like self-medicating.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've been there, done that.
But you're past it, though. Well,
I'm working on it. Every time I get on Facebook and I go to our Facebook page and that, people go, "You got it." And when I was in recovery at the Pinnacle Recovery Center, anytime anybody said, "You got it," it was kind of like, ooh. You never want to say you got it, because as soon as you get complacent, that's when it starts to fall down. So I always say, I don't got it yet, but I'm giving it all I got.
I think that's absolutely the right way to look at it, right? You can't get complacent if you want to keep your behavior change going. But I think we've had such a great response from Facebook. I think people are they want to encourage you, and they want to say, like, you've got it, like, keep going.
Yeah.
I think that's the message.
I get what they're meaning.
People enjoy seeing other people be successful and overcome things.
That's what's so great about this community now that I'm in it, is that they are so generous and they are so willing to help you out. And when I was alone in my addiction, sitting on the back deck, drinking a 12-pack, smoking a cigar, I felt alone. Just 100% alone.
Yeah, well, you literally were.
I was alone, but I didn't think anybody would relate, know what I'm going through.
You feel emotionally isolated, and that's why people don't talk about it, is they think, well, no one's really going to understand my problem. And there's a lot of different ways to justify, like, either they feel like maybe my problem's not as big as someone else's problem, or, people might think I've got a sweet life. How could I have any problems? But the reality is, if you don't start talking about it, if you don't create the conversation, like I hope our podcast is doing, then you stay in that isolated state. So we've got to reach out and talk and realize that many of us have addictive and compulsive problems and behaviors, and we just don't talk about it.
I get a lot of people going, I'm not even addicted to alcohol or drugs, but I know I've got an addictive personality, and this podcast is really helping me.
I was just on KSL News Radio talking about the shopping addiction and how people the retail therapy is actually triggering dopamine in our brains, and it's very similar to taking pills and smoking weed and drinking alcohol. It's this quick fix, and it creates this roller coaster of emotions for people, but it wrecks your life with debt.
Yeah. Hey, we're talking about addiction, and that's what this podcast is about. And you said, not a lot of people are talking about it, except for our guest today, Court McGee, Utah native, UFC champion, Ultimate Fighter winner, and resident bad boy. Is that safe to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
it's not very bad boy response.
I mean, if we were going to throw fisticuff in this room, how many of us would walk out?
One.
Probably just one.
Just one. I think we all know who it would be.
But, Court, you started in Utah, and you've got an amazing story. And here on the podcast, we like to talk about people's journey into addiction and then celebrate their journey out. So if you don't mind, how did your journey to addiction begin?
Well, I'm a Utah native. I grew up in Layton, Utah, just off of Hill Air Force Base. Had a great family. I have parents that have been married for almost 40 years this year. And one older brother who's educated and lives in Torrance, California, and works on light rail. But early on, I was an athlete, and I was rambunctious, and you could say I have that addictive personality. I over-concentrate on one thing, and I just go full bore at it. And at a young age, I sustained a couple of injuries during high school wrestling, and then I had started drinking, and when I mixed the pain pills with the alcohol, it affected me, and I lost everything, shortly thereafter. I graduated high school, went to college for 6 months.
But I want to go back real quick because you said something I think that will strike a chord with a lot of the listeners here on Project Recovery, is that you had a great family, and your parents were married, and you did the sports and all that. And I think a lot of times people think addicts are addicts because some traumatic event or some upbringing. And I'm not discounting that. I think a lot of people are led down that road because of some of those events. But a lot of times people just get into it because they do, right?
Well, I mean, if you look at the disease of addiction in itself, it can be inherent in your personality long before you take a drink or a drug. And so for me, I think the disease of addiction was inherent in my personality long before I took that first drink.
We see it run in families, and that's a very good thing for our listeners to pause and think about. Do I have addiction in my family history? If so, I need to pay attention to what I'm doing to avoid that.
Yeah, you're way more likely to struggle from addiction. And I mean, if you have issues at home or issues yourself, and that starts earlier, I mean, that's why you end up dropping out of school. We're one of the most hardest hit states in the country. I think we're ranked in this, number 6, number 7 in the country for accidental overdose and drug overdose deaths. And, that's that. I am a typical story of what happened. I went from pain pills to heroin, in a short period of time.
The opioid addiction that's happening around the country. I mean, that really is where you most likely had a predisposition towards addiction for various reasons, but then you were introduced to it, I guess we could kind of say honestly, you were just getting treatment for your injuries.
Yeah, sustained some injuries. I had a shattered collarbone. I was prescribed pain pills. It wasn't fixed, and so 2 weeks later we got a second opinion, and then it was like, hey, we need to get in and fix this collarbone. So I had a surgery, and I had already been taking pain pills, so it extended that. And, you talk about becoming dependent just after 4 or 5 days or 7 days. Mm-hmm. And it's like, not only was I dependent within those 4 or 5 days, but the addiction, the allergy to that opiate just took everything from me. I was like, wow, what's this? See, I lost a scholarship because of Title IX, Women's and Men's Fairness in Sports. And there was no colleges in the state of Utah in 2003 that had wrestling programs except for clubs. And so I was kind of at a loss. And then I had already started abusing the pain pills, and I thought, I can't leave the state and go wrestle because I won't be able to find my medicine. I won't be able to go find the pain
so you're
pills.
already limiting this awesome option of being a college athlete just to maintain the pills.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you remember what the pills did for you, for your mental state and your body? I mean, was it a euphoric feeling, or did it kind of just – because I've heard some people describe it as it fixed a hole that was in them, and others that it just numbed out.
Well, here's the situation I was in. Growing up, I was either going to find a career after high school as long as I graduate, which was super important in my family. Find a career, work there for 30 years and retire, or go to college, find a career, work there for 30 years and retire. And that was my options. And neither of those options sounded great to me. And I was confused, and I was 18 years old and thinking, what the heck am I going to do? My brother went to college, so I thought, okay, maybe I'll go to college too. But I'm not going to college to wrestle. I wasn't going to college to get an education. I was going to college to wrestle to become a better MMA fighter. See, I watched a documentary at like maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. I had only been in martial arts. I had done some City League wrestling, and I just saw this Mark Kerr Smashing Machine documentary, and I thought, that's what I want to do. That is what I'm going to do. And
now,
so,
do you think that your your addiction, like I say to people, that I'm all in on whatever I'm doing. If it was drinking, I'm all in.
Yep.
If it's exercise, I'm all in. If it's a Netflix show, I'm all in.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me and hurts me. Do you feel you're the same kind of personality?
Yeah, no, I definitely am. And I was faced with these options, and I thought, what do I do? What do I do? And then that's where the pain pills came in. And so the euphoric feeling you were talking about, like at the suggestion of a friend, he said, hey, listen, crush this pill up and snort it, and it like takes care of all the pain that you're in and gives you tons of energy. And I was like, man, that's not a good idea. I mean, I wasn't even the kid that snorted pixie sticks when you're young. It's like I'm like, I don't know about this. And so I sucked off the coating, I crushed it up, I snorted it, and I didn't get high. And I said, I'm going to try it one more time. And then that's it. I tried it one more time, and it hit me. And I was like, you know what? I'll figure it out. Whatever happens, happens. It'll be okay. Everything will be okay now. So it was like a comfort. Like, well, yeah, I'll go to school, and I'll just, go to school and then figure it out. And then that's what started my journey, was crushing up that Oxycontin and snorting it. And that's from that point on, it was like fast forward a year later by the snap of my fingers. Boom. And I had quit going to college. I increased my use tremendously. I did whatever I could to get the pain pills. And then when they didn't have pain pills and all they had was cocaine, it was like, well, I'll do cocaine. It'll give me some energy for work. And then pretty soon it was like I was getting close to getting fired, so I had to quit and go find a new job. But then I had to sober up for the new job. And so I'd sober up for 2 or 3 days, and I'd be like, okay, hey, you know what? Maybe I can sober up. Maybe I don't have a problem. And as long as I have a job, I'm not a drug addict. And then I started getting the consequences where I get a DUI arrest, and then I get arrested for this, and I get arrested for that. And then pretty soon it was just, it was taking care of pain. Plus, I had started drinking during the summers in high school, but only on the weekends because I worked full time. So I thought I was managing it. I was just having fun. And the feeling was so elusive that I had to continue to do it. But now I started having consequences. So it was fun with consequences. And then like maybe a year out of high school, it was all consequences. I had lost everything around me. I had a pretty steady girlfriend all through high school. Friendship for the first couple of years, and then pretty steady, and a year out of high school and a year into college, she's just like, I can't do this anymore. You're in too much trouble all the time. And so we separated, and I really hit a bottom after that. I was like, man, I don't have anybody left. My parents kicked me out of the house. My brother was sick of bailing me out and hearing the same old story like, oh, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I just got caught, or I this and that. And then I didn't have any friends around me except for the 2 friends that I grew up with, which all 3 of us had one thing in common, is we started using about the same time because of injuries, and we continued that. But our relationship went from friendship of fishing, working out together, even wrestling together, to just using drugs together, and that's all we could do. And then our lives were crashing down around us. And, I ended up getting kicked out of the little apartment I was at. I got fired from the job. I admitted that I had a problem with alcohol, and they said, we don't have room for you here, but if you get sober, we want you back. You're a great employee. And that was it. And I just thought, what the heck am I doing? And within a couple of weeks, I had lost the place I was living. I was couch surfing, and then I ran out of couches to surf, and I had nobody else to turn to. And then I found heroin. And I shot up for the first time, and all my problems went away. All the disappointment in my father's eyes went away. All the disappointment in my mother's eyes. Losing the wrestling career, not going on to college in wrestling, not having a career. All of a sudden, it was like heroin said, you know what, dude? That's all right as long as you got me.
But the reality is it didn't go away. The disappointment was still there.
Everything was still there. It was an illusion, and that illusion was the disease of addiction. That illusion was, if you use me, everything will be okay, but everything was not okay, and it continued to get worse. I had a cousin that was just wonderful, and she said, you know what, you can move into my trailer. She was clean at the time. She had been doing really well, and she said, just as long as you don't use drugs here. You can drink a little bit, but you can't use drugs here.
Now, how long have you been living this lifestyle? I mean, because you say, a year after high school, you're out of college, you're not going to college, you've got some DUIs, you've lost a couple of jobs. How long was this lifestyle going for you?
From 18 to halfway through 19.
I mean, that's a pretty fast trip. You went from not being a drug abuser to a year later picking up heroin.
Yep, drinking on weekends. The only thing that stopped me from drinking through high school, especially in the fall and spring, was wrestling at Layton High School and my coach. And I thought, I can't do anything that interferes with my wrestling. But by the time high school ended and I lost that scholarship, it was like
motivation.
I didn't have that. There was no motivation to stop. So it was kind of like, okay, well, now I can drink after work. But when I would like put limitations on it, I always passed those limitations. And within a couple of months of drinking like that, like I had to drink in the morning just to get rid of the shakes. I mean, it was bad. And then
we had Randall Carlisle in, and he said there was times in his addiction that he'd have to drink 3 beers just so he could shave, just so his hands would stop shaking, so he could shave.
I mean, to be completely honest, so I was 20, so I had to have somebody buy my alcohol for me. And I was working at this construction job, and so I'd get a temporary hire guy, and I would offer to buy him a pint of whiskey if he bought me a pint of like vodka or whiskey or whatever. And so I would do that. I would take 2 or 3 swigs at like 10 or 11 a.m. and then try and eat something so I'd cover up the smell. And then as soon as I got off work, the neighbor that I was living in these little apartments, I would say, hey, will you buy me an 18-pack? I'll buy you a 6-pack. And he would do that. I'd buy an 18-pack, and I'd say, okay, I'm only going to drink 16 and wake up with 2. Sometimes if I ended up drinking the 18-pack, I woke up and I was suffering. And, you know, if I didn't, I would leave 2 for the morning. I would drink those 2, get to work for the first couple of hours, and then buy that whiskey, take a couple shots of whiskey, and then as soon as work got done, I would go right back and get more.
And that's that addiction mindset. All of a sudden, everything you do starts to center around maintaining and promoting your use. And so you're planning, you just beautifully walked through how an addict thinks about their 24 hours. You know, what am I going to do from the time I get up to before I go to work?
I can't buy beer before 7 o'clock. I can't buy it after 1 o'clock. I've got to make sure that I've got it. And if you don't, it's like you're missing an appendage. Your arm's gone. You're like, what am I going to do? I can't go 8 hours without a beer. I can't do that. That's my story.
The body aches from the excessive drinking, pain pills would take care of that pain. Not to mention, if I had pain pills, then I could take pain pills, achieve a certain level of high, still work, and not smell like alcohol. And then the cocaine would help wake me up and get me going, but most of the time I couldn't stop. And if I ended up, they only had a certain amount of cocaine, and I bought that much cocaine, I would use that much cocaine, and then here comes nighttime, I got to go to sleep. So I got to either smoke some weed, drink myself to sleep, or find some Xanax to help me go to sleep. And so you get into this vicious cycle super quick.
It's like the devil's food pyramid.
Yeah. And then roughly 18 months out of high school, maybe 6 or 7 months after quitting college and then going to work, I was able to move into the trailer. I stayed there, and I had been shooting heroin. And I found another job, landscaping. I lied to the guy to get in. Yep, I'm clean. I'm this and this. And, I showed up to work, and I just thought as long as I have a little bit of heroin to make it throughout the day, I'll be okay. And that turned into shooting up like 40 or 50 times a day, just little micro doses all throughout the day just to maintain and manage. And to get that, to find that, making $10 an hour mowing lawns was challenging. So I had to sell wheat. I had to become a drug dealer. And just to keep that high. And then that day, September 9th, 2005 came. It was a Sunday. I was in the trailer, and I shot up the normal amount I was going to shoot up. I had a little bit for the morning, and either it was too pure, or maybe it was cut with some fentanyl, or maybe I shot up a little bit more, but that was my overdose. And, I mean, a lot happened before that, but I overdosed September 9th, 2005 at like 10 p.m. SportsCenter did a piece.
Yeah.
The SportsCenter, ESPN, like the SportsCenter piece, they did Dead Man Fighting, the Court McGee story. And I shot up and I went, oh, and then that was it. I fell over. And I mean, the things that happened that night for me to be here today are incredible nonetheless. But it's like I hit the floor and my cousin and her friend came home from shopping. They were going to go out to eat, from my understanding, and they bought some ice cream, so they had to drop the ice cream off so it wouldn't melt. And they came in, and there was somebody else there, and I was stuck in the bathroom. I went into the bathroom to hide my using, and I had fallen in between the wall, the door, off of the toilet, so the door was slammed shut, and they were standing outside of the door, banging on the door, trying to get in, like, hey, and I don't know what happened to Court. He fell down, and they came in. They ended up breaking the door down. They called 911. There was an ambulance within, 2 or 3 minutes, I think, from when the call to when they got there.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
That
So
they
were
there.
you breathing? Do you know?
No. So they called the ambulance and they called my mom and dad. My mom and dad got there. They were like about 3 miles away. So they got there really quick. The ambulance got there before they got there, and they ended up breaking the door down. They pulled me out. They started CPR. They got me into the ambulance. They did CPR and defibrillations in the ambulance. But they said I was like, when they pulled me out of the bathroom, like I was like non-responsive and like blue. I was in an overdose. And so like every 20 or 30 seconds, I would take like a big deep of breath, and then that stopped. But they started CPR. They did CPR and defibrillations for like 16 or 17 minutes.
Wow.
But I had no pulse and no heartbeat for like 8 minutes. And that was in Davis Hospital. And so I was gone. And then there was an undercover narcotics officer who had like arrested me multiple times for other incidences earlier. And he moved to undercover narcotics, and he found the syringe that I overdosed on. So the trailer was clean, except for my heroin that I had in my glass case. And that was closed and pushed off onto the floor. And then the syringe that I OD'd on had fallen in between the linoleum and the wall. There was an edge that lifted up, and it was just sitting there. So he found the syringe, and he called and said, hey, it's a heroin overdose.
And tell everybody why that's important.
So they wouldn't. I was in renal failure, and like my body was starting to shut down, and they used Narcolone or Narcan, and they reversed the effect of the opioid overdose.
But if they hadn't known what you overdosed on, they wouldn't have known to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Right.
At all. So I wouldn't be here. They would have just stopped the chest compressions after 20 minutes or whatever their
Pronounced you dead
is.
and
Pronounced me dead, and I would have been the next opiate overdose.
Right.
And instead, like, they were able to reduce the effect by administering the Narcolone, and then they induced me into a coma because they didn't know how long I was out for. And I was in there. I'm not sure how long I was in there, but when I came out of the coma, I know that a few people had called this licensed clinical social worker who also had over 20 years of continuous recovery, complete abstinence from drugs and alcohol, and he was a former heroin addict. And he came in, and I had talked with my dad a little bit. I had a friend that I grew up with that came and talked to me, and I don't remember what I said to him. I didn't know why I was there. My chest was in a considerable amount of pain. They broke my sternum and my ribs.
Yeah.
I mean, I had tubes, and I was like, where am I? What happened? I was out of it. And then this guy came in there, and he was, the best way to describe him was a role model with a solution. I mean, it was fall, close to winter. It was cold, and he came in with shorts on and like a Hawaiian shirt, and he just like scooted across the floor in his sandals, and he talked to me, and after 5 minutes, I knew he knew the pain that I had been in.
Mm-hmm.
why was that so important to you?
Because I didn't feel like anybody understood how bad it was. Like, I wanted to stop, and I tried to stop, but I couldn't. I knew I was damaging and ruining everything around me, and my only solution was to continue to use to get rid of those problems, but it just put a Band-Aid on them. It didn't actually solve the problems. And so when that guy said, listen, this is where I've been, this is my story, in 5 minutes, I was like, man, that guy,
he gets
was homeless, he's lost everything, and now he's got multiple years, like, and I don't
cool
know
Hawaiian
exactly
shirts.
how he put it, and I was just like, man, he's so calm and he's happy, and he's like, listen, man, he said, there's a bed at this hospital, Highland Ridge Hospital. You got to go there, and then you got to attend recovery meetings and listen to what they have to say. I'll call you while you're in there, and I'll come visit you. And that's one of your options. And then my parents came in, and I remember my parents said, okay, so this is your only option, because if you leave here, you don't have us. You're done. And I would have got arrested. That
Meaning
narcotics officer.
If you rejected the help that was
if I
being
rejected
offered.
the help,
Yeah.
you're on your own.
Yep.
So you just died, and now you've had an intervention in your hospital room.
Yep.
And this guy gives you a way out.
Yep.
And your thoughts? I mean, did you even debate it?
I didn't, because when he shared with me some of his experience, I went, this guy's not lying to me. He's telling the truth.
It was genuine.
And he made like 2 suggestions. And he's like, if you do this, man, you can have freedom from all of this. You can go. You can go without drinking and using, and you can live a really good life, but you've got to trust me. And I was like, man, I trust this guy.
And why was this guy doing this?
I don't know. Because somebody called somebody that called somebody who ended up being in recovery. And in his recovery, he decided he wanted to go to school and become a licensed clinical social worker. And then he decided he was going to help drug addicts. And I was a drug addict that needed help. And so late at night, he came into a hospital and talked to a drug addict. And after 5 minutes, made a couple of suggestions, and I was willing to do it. And so that's what I did. I was whisked off to Highland Ridge Hospital. I was in the psych ward for like a week, and then I got out, and then they started taking me to recovery meetings, and they started doing group therapy and started doing what people in recovery do in treatment centers. And I was surrounded by people who were trying to get sober and people who had achieved sobriety and licensed clinical staff and other people who, and I was like, wow, like this is something. And I went to this recovery meeting, and this big guy stood up and he said, he talked about rebuilding a relationship with his mom, which I knew I had lost with mine. And he said, if I stay sober, clean and sober for one more day, I'll have 6 months of continuous recovery. And I was like, holy cow, that guy's telling the truth. So I started calling that guy, and I started talking to that guy. He gave me a few suggestions, and I had a few slips, once in treatment, one like 3 days out, only one day, like one time. And then I stayed completely sober for like 5.5 months. And then somebody slid, and I had a sober 21st birthday, and I was feeling good. I had dedicated some time at Layton High School as an assistant coach under Mike Hansen, like his last year of wrestling, and I was just like, holy cow, like my whole life had changed.
You found a groove.
Yeah, and I was like, man, I can accomplish anything. I can do anything. And I just was like, man, this is incredible. Now, I suggested not to hang with people I used to hang with that were drinking and stuff. And I thought maybe I was different. I thought, you know what, I can still be around these guys, And I had a bunch of criminal charges, felony drug charges from the heroin overdose, plus charges that I'd had that were already, like previously charged. I was dealing with that stuff. And I was just like, man, I don't know. I a lot of stress, but I knew there was hope if I stayed sober, continued to attend recovery meetings and keep around that group of people. And I just thought maybe I can help some of my old friends. And I ended up going on a trip with this group, and one of the people had relapsed, and they slid a drink my way. And I put it up to my lips, and I set it down, and I was thinking, man, this is not a good idea. And one of them said, well, that's pretty much a relapse, but if we both drink tonight, we can get sober tomorrow and have the same sobriety birthday. And so I drank that Long Island iced tea, and it led to the worst 2 weeks and 1 day of my life. But it led me to my bottom. My parents thought I was sober.
That's crazy, because you just talked about dying in a trailer on a bathroom floor and going this, and you haven't reached your rock bottom yet.
Mm-hmm.
And after 5.5 months of sobriety and a Long Island iced tea in 2 weeks plus 1 day, you finally find your rock bottom. What does that look like?
So I ended up in Iowa 5 days later from Las Vegas, and in a complete blackout drunk. I would have used anything, I just whatever. I was just in a complete blackout. I was asked to come out there to help a friend move some of his dad's stuff, so I rented a rider van, and we drove out there, and I was drunk the whole time, and we switched from driver to driver, and I couldn't participate with it. I couldn't move anything. I couldn't do anything, and I ended up out in Iowa, to my closest friend, and he's just like, dude, you're a mess, man. He knew I'd been through treatment. He knew, oh, no, I'm just having a little bit of beer, and like he knew that it was bad. And he's like, man, you got to go back and get help. You got to do whatever. Well, I wasn't supposed to leave the state, and I had been to like multiple states. I had all these problems. I had not got a job. I was not following any of the suggestions I was given from the people in recovery. And I just was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to drink myself to death. And then as soon as I get back, I'll go turn myself in to the district attorney, and I'll go to prison, and then I can get sober in prison, and it'll work. It's confined. There's structure. Like, that's where I need to be. That's probably the best place for me. My parents won't have to worry about me. I won't be surrounded by my friends. Like, I'll just be in prison. I'll do what I need to do, and I'll get some clean time, and you know, everything will work out, and that's what I'll do. So I made it back home.
So prison was your recovery plan?
Yeah, and I thought that's where I deserved to be.
And that kind of shows how our focus, our thought process gets warped and changed through the process of being addicted to something. That something like prison sounds like a logical option.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you're planning on, well, that's the best place for me to go. And you felt like you deserved that. So that self-esteem was down, and that logical reasoning was down, and everything gets destroyed when you're in the throes of that addictive process.
Yeah. And then one thing happened a couple of months prior to that. I donated time at Layton High School as an assistant coach, and it sparked something in me. I wanted to compete. I had lost my option to compete before that, and so I started teaching wrestling at a jiu-jitsu gym and started learning jiu-jitsu, as well as doing some kickboxing and some boxing. And so I thought maybe that's what I would end up doing. And so around that time, I had started training, and that sparked. So fast forward, April 16th, 2006, I show up to my parents' house under the assumption that I'm completely sober, because I was not allowed there. But because I was sober, they were going to give me a couple days to stay there, and then I had to find a place to live and, of course, work and start taking care of, you know, court fines and restitution and fees and lawyer costs and all that stuff.
Because it all adds up, and it just
It
hangs
all
over
adds
you.
up.
I think a lot of times people think because you're sober, that stuff goes away.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away. It just becomes more manageable because you're clear-headed and you've got a goal and you've got some attention to it.
Yep. But because of some of the stigma surrounding addiction, it's very challenging. And so I showed up to my parents' house. I knew my dad had some, like, Milwaukee's Best or Natural Light laying around somewhere, so I snuck around the house, and, you know, I was like, okay, I gotta find a beer, and then I'll just drink a beer, and then I'll figure it out. And he ended up having them hid in his room, so I snuck into the room while my mom and dad were sleeping. As 21-year-old adult, snuck into the room, reached into the 12-pack or whatever it was, pulled a beer out, like, snuck downstairs, opened the beer up, and I heard the footsteps of my dad coming across the kitchen floor. And I was like, and I put the beer down, and he walked down the stairs, and I remember looking at him, and he said, "Son, I thought you weren't supposed to drink." And then I set the beer down, and that was 4,786 days ago.
Wow.
That was it.
So you didn't even drink it?
Nope. I was done. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Called the district attorney the next morning and said, "Hey, I left the state. I've been drinking. I got a bunch of drugs." Stop right there. I want you to be here Friday, and I want you to be sober. And I was like, it's Monday, and Friday's a long ways away. I can't guarantee anything, but I'll do my best.
That's an eternity.
Yep. And so I started calling those recovery people. My dad had suggested, like, meeting with one of the guys that he knew that he'd kind of grown up with that owned a small commercial plumbing company. And he's like, "Hey, go in and talk with him. Maybe he can get you a job." And so Wednesday rolled around. I hadn't drank yet. I hadn't used yet. And I went in basically for an interview. And I sat down, and I was just like, he's like, "Well, tell me about yourself." And I was like, "I got a bunch of criminal charges. I'm probably going to prison. And I've got about 3 days of sobriety."
Now you're being honest, just real honest, yeah.
Probably the worst interview he's ever had.
Ever.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Great. Meetings are great. Hey, man. Yeah, you're hired. Be here tomorrow."
Wow, that's great.
was
That's
like,
an amazing
what?
response, yeah.
Yeah. And so the next day, Thursday, I started. And then Friday, after work was over, I went down and I met with the district attorney. And she saw something that I didn't see in myself. She put me in a program for inmates getting out of prison, the Nuke program, on 24th or 25th Street in Ogden. And she said, "You got to attend this. It's like 2 or 3 hours every Friday evening, and you need to go to 2 self-help group meetings a week, like an AA or NA, a 12-step meeting. You have to go to 2 of those a week, check in, and then you got to go to this program, and you got to get your signature, as well as you have a color on file, and you've got to do random UAs. So
I'm brown.
Yeah.
I still have to call. I
purple,
call every day.
Yellow, and green.
Yep.
I remember them. And so that's where it started. And I started attending recovery meetings. And, a couple of months later, I reunited with my high school sweetheart. We started dating again.
How did you pull that off, Court? That's what I want to know.
I went bowling, and I had a girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
And she went bowling, and she had a boyfriend. She was actually engaged, and we had talked about getting engaged. She was in recovery as well, the partner that I had at the
Court's
time.
a real man. This girl's engaged.
Yeah.
So we go bowling, and I see Chelsea. Now, she moved to Russia to teach English. So when she left me, she really left me. She moved to Russia to teach English. Yep. And then she came back, and she had heard that, it was really bad and all, whatever. And so I think she was trying to delete the Court McGee history and
the file,
move on.
Yeah.
And I saw her, and I was like, holy cow, it's Chelsea. And so I went up to her, and I was like, Chelsea? And she's like, Court, you're alive? And then she ran over to me. She gave me a hug, and she said, you don't smell like beer. And I was like, I'm completely sober. Only a couple of weeks, but I'm completely sober. And she was like, really? And as she says, I was everything that she wanted me to be without the alcohol and drugs. And, I fell in love with that girl when I was 15. I chased her for like 2 years and then finally conned her into dating me, and I just loved her to death. And and all of a sudden it was there. And so we had separated from our significant others, and we started dating. And I started going to work every day, and I started making my financial amends with the state through the criminal justice system, my court fees, my lawyer fees, showing up to my meetings, showing up to the nuke meetings that were on 25th Street, and I just started one day at a time.